Though I can't see your holy face and your throne in heaven above, it seems so far away. Though I can't touch your nail-scarred hands, I have a deep, unspeakable joy that makes my faith to stand. Lord, I believe in you. I'll always believe in you. Though I can't see you with my eyes, deep in my heart, your presence I find. Lord, I believe in you, and I'll keep my trust in you. Let this whole world say what they may, no one can take this joy away. Lord, I believe. Born from above, you are God's only chosen one. You are the one and only true way to the Father's heart. You died for all sin, and then you rose and now live again, conquering death and the grave, so that I might live. Lord, I believe in you. I'll always believe in you. Though I can't see you with my eyes, deep in my heart, your presence I find. Lord, I believe in you, and I'll keep my trust in you. So let this whole world say what they may, no one can take this joy away. Lord, I believe. Oh, Lord, I believe in you. I'll always believe in you. Though I can't see you with my eyes, deep in my heart, your presence I find. Lord, I believe in you, and I'll keep my trust in you. So let this whole world say what they may, no one can take this joy away. Oh, I believe, I believe. Thank you.
Music always adds so much to our worship service, and we appreciate that beautiful song so very much. I guess the title of the message this morning says it all. Where has all the time gone? It seems like it was only yesterday that we were discussing the end of 2013. And now we're discussing the end of 2014. And for some of us, time goes by way too fast, and for others, it doesn't go by fast enough. I guess it's one of those things where, depending on where you are in terms of age, as to whether you want it to go fast or whether you want it to slow down. But from where I'm sitting or standing, I'd just soon see it slow down just a little bit. And if you're a young person sitting out there, they want it to just go by as quickly as it can because they want to grow up, you know. But nonetheless, time goes by all too quickly. And as we survey 2014, at least for our congregation here, I think it's probably the same in the congregations where your home church is, if you're visiting with us today. We've seen some pretty interesting things happen. We've lost some of our family members, church family members. We've added some, and some have moved on. Typical things. So nothing ever stays the same. And I'm sure that you've noticed that at the conclusion of every year that rolls around, some of the major magazines and news organizations put out their special issues recalling people and events that made news during the previous year. And when you think about those people that died this past year, you'll quickly realize that most of them have been either entertainers or politicians of some kind, you know. Very rarely do you see them put a list of an average person, but their lives were important. And sometimes they include articles by experts predicting what they expect to see in the next year, the coming year. And sometimes they even go as far as making predictions that project, 10, 20, 30 years into the future. Well, it just seems like that when they do that, it just seems like every now and again, one of these predictions that are made comes true, doesn't it? I mean, either true outright or amazingly close to what was predicted, while others couldn't have been more wrong. And that is true as well. Now, some of you may recall back in the middle to late 60s, experts predicted that by the time we entered the 21st century, technology would have taken over much of the work that humans were doing at the time. And as a result, the average American work week would be reduced to 22 hours. And that we would work only 27 weeks out of the year. As a result, by their predictions, if you want to call them that, they predicted that one of the biggest problems of the 21st century would be to find something for humans to do with all of their leisure time. Well, I think this goes without saying, at least in my own life and probably in yours too. I wish I could work a 22-hour week, don't you? And I wish my biggest problem was trying to find out what to do with all of the extra time that I have. Because this prediction certainly didn't come true in my life at least. And so here we are, the last Sabbath of 2014. Some of you probably are already thinking about 2015. And you probably have asked yourself the question, I wonder how we'll do in 2015. Will it be more of the same types of things that we experienced in 2014? Will we be able to slow down or not be as busy as we were in 2014? Maybe you've even thought about, maybe you've even asked yourself the question, will we make any better use of our time than we did in 2014? In the 365 days that are before us, will we be looking back at the end of 2015 with joy or regret? Are we looking at the new year with anticipation or with dread? Perhaps it's beginning to dawn on you, sink in a little bit that, you know what, 2015 doesn't really look any better than 2014 did. I don't know what you're thinking. But I know one thing. We cannot know the future other than in broad outlines. But we cannot know day to day what the situation will be like. But we can, as Bible-believing Christians, we can take comfort knowing that we serve a mighty God. And He does know the future. And perhaps more importantly for us, He is never wrong. In other words, if He says something in His Word, at the end of this coming year, we can be assured that it has not changed. There are some things that change, obviously, from day to day, but when God is in charge, He's always right. There is a passage of Scripture that I believe can help us as we bring 2014 to a close and as we usher in 2015. You know what? I'm not going to make any New Year's resolutions. Because I don't know about you, but every single time I make one, not very far into the new year, I find myself having to backtrack. Well, this is not going to happen. Why do you do it every year? I mean, take for instance, the resolution that I wanted to make, I did make, and I don't think I promised you, but I think it was pretty close, that I would try to end on time. Not go past 12:15, but you can look at the clock, it's already 12:15. In fact, it's 12:16. And so that really underscores the problem with making New Year's resolutions. But people do all the time. And so I thought what I would do this time is just dispense with the New Year's resolution, even discussing some with you. Some of you probably have thought about some yourselves. But I thought about this passage of Scripture that I think really does give us a fairly broad, well, not even broad, specific maybe, outline of how we can look to the future in 2015. And this passage is found in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 and 17. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 17. And notice what it says. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because, and we sometimes tend to overlook this, because the days are evil. Now, we might be able to sit around a table and spend some time debating on this portion of this verse. And we can sit around until we can say, well, you know what, maybe it's really not as evil as some people think it is. And besides, should we really be focusing on that anyway? How about focusing on some positive things? Why do we always have to be talking about how bad things are, you see? But it's not us, is it? It's God. And He tells the Apostle Paul to remind us of just how bad things really are. And he says, so because the days are evil, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. There are several things in these verses that will help us as we look to the new year. Get sort of a handle on how we need to conduct ourselves in the coming year. So in these passages we just read, there are several valuable life lessons. And the Apostle Paul begins by reminding us about a truism that is all that we all understand intellectually. That is, I can understand what he's saying intellectually, as we can a lot of things. We can say, well, yes, I understand that. I can rationalize that. I can understand it. I know exactly what he's talking about. But the problem with understanding something intellectually is that oftentimes we fail to live out these very lessons in our daily lives. It has been said that maybe one of those, because we do that, we can understand them intellectually, but we cannot seem to implement them in our daily lives. Someone has suggested that maybe it's one of those defense mechanisms. Well, you know what those are, don't you? Those are things that psychologists tell us we use in order to cope with the reality of facing difficult, painful, and uncertain realities in our daily lives. In other words, if we don't think about all the unpleasant things in our lives, well, maybe we can convince ourselves that they don't really exist. Now, I know that none of us here we've never done that, have we? We know that we're about to face a very difficult situation, but we keep telling ourselves over and over, well, it's really not that bad. Not to get worried. Don't get upset. And eventually we just simply tell ourselves, well, you know what? It never existed in the first place. We can do that, of course. But that doesn't change reality, does it? It doesn't change it any. For example, if your expenditures are greater than your income, continuing to spend is not going to change the outcome, is it? It's still, the reality is that you still spend more than you bring in. In fact, by ignoring it and continuing to spend anyway, your situation is going to even get worse. But if you convince yourself that it's really not happening, then maybe the reality doesn't exist. But the Apostle Paul lays out for us several things. And one of these realities is this: our time on earth is limited. That's about as basic and fundamental as you can get. The reality is, no matter how we live our lives, how we do things, the reality is that we have only so much time here on earth. And there's nothing that you or I can do to change that. Okay, let me rephrase that. There are some things we might do to delay that, by living right, eating healthy, watching our diet and getting exercise and plenty of rest and all those great and wonderful things. And we should be doing those anyway. But the reality is that eventually, unless Jesus comes before then, eventually every single one of us will come to the end of our days. Isn't that right? That is a reality. Remember, the psalmist David wrote in Psalm 39, verse 4, "Show me, O Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting is my life." Who wants to know that? Why is that important? So that we can dwell on it each and every day? No. So that we can be reminded again that our time on earth is limited. Now, here's an interesting phenomenon. These young people, look around, you can see them, they're here. And when I mean young people, I mean those that are younger than me. But there are some even younger than that. Look around, you can see them. And you know what? Here is an interesting thing. They may not admit this, but it's true. When young people look at us older folk, they just can't wrap their minds around the idea that we were young like they were one time. They just can't do it. No way, he was never young like me. Is there a young person that'd be willing to say, yeah, that's what I think, that's what I believe? I can't imagine the pastor ever being 15 or 20. And the other thing is that they cannot grapple with successfully is that one day the reality is that they're going to look just like us. Now there is something for you to think about. Yeah, you're going to have gray hair. You're going to have a few wrinkles around the eyes and stuff. And maybe some things here will sag, under the arms, those kinds of things. I know you don't think that's going to happen, but it will. So the psalmist tells us to number our days. In fact, there was a time in our history, not too long ago, that People magazine published an article entitled "Dead Ahead." Anybody here remember that article? Dead Ahead. And the article told about a new clock that keeps track of how much time you have left to live. And this is how it worked. You put in your gender, and you basically calculate it on a 75 years for men and 80 years for women. And so you program your gender and your age into the clock, and from then on it will tell you how much time you have left on average. And that clock sold for about $100. So these things are important, aren't they, to some people? And this may surprise you, but insurance companies do that all the time. They calculate these very things that we're talking about. You see. And I believe after just seeing that as an example, that is exactly what the psalmist David told us to do, to number our days. But wait a minute, you say. Neither you nor I have any guarantee of even one more day to live. In fact, doesn't the Bible tell us that? Not to count on tomorrow, because tomorrow may not come for you or for me. And that's true too. Again, we're told, Psalm 90 verse 10 says, "The length of our days is 70 or 80 years, if we have the strength. They quickly pass, and we fly away." And so one person said recently, all the time that we really have is what? Right now. That's it. You know for certain that you have the time right now, as we all do. But 3 hours from now, can anyone say they have 3 more hours? No, we can't. So the thing is that we know we have right now. And so our time on earth is valuable. And the reason that it's valuable is because it's limited. But God's counsel regarding time doesn't end there. The Apostle Paul reminds us, not only must we be reminded that our time on earth is limited, but secondly, we must make the most of every opportunity we are given while we have the time. These are important. The Apostle Paul tells us that we must make the most of every opportunity. And he gives us the reason, again, in Ephesians chapter 5. Notice again what it says with verse 15. Then we see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days in which we are living are evil and wicked, all-consuming. And Jesus said that Satan is a robber, a thief, and a liar. Didn't he say that? He's a robber, he's a thief, and he's a liar. And one of the most valuable things he tries to rob us from is our time, because it is the most precious possession we have. How many times have you said something? I mean, you realized after it was already coming out of your mouth that you had made a mistake. You had said the wrong thing. I have. And for a moment, you almost wish you could just reach out and grab it and pull it right back and stuff it back in your mouth. But it's floating out there somewhere. And it'll be floating around out there for eternity. And you wish you could take it back. How many of you are here that are here this morning would like to be able to get back 15, 20, 30 years? Who would be brave enough to say, I would like that? If I just had 20 more years, even 10 years, I would do this differently. I would do that differently. I would not make the same choice that I made or get myself into this predicament that I did. If I could just bring back some of my time. But you can't. It's gone forever. One person said it this way: just think of the time wasted in going against God, fighting God. You feel the Holy Spirit trying to make an impression upon you, trying to reach you, trying to bring you around to a decision that you know is right and that you have to make. And you stand there and you resist day in and day out. Think of the time wasted in gossiping and spreading rumors about other people. Or think about all the time wasted worrying about the consequences of the mistakes that we have made. Some people go through their lives suffering from guilt at the mistakes that they have made. Satan is a thief and a robber. But it is not just doing our own things that rob us of our time. Sometimes even good things, and you might be just wondering for a split second, how are good things robbing us of time? We think about the story of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. You remember the story well. We talked about these 3 Bible characters last Sabbath. But Jesus went to the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and he sat down to teach, and Mary was sitting at his feet, just soaking in every word that Jesus spoke. I like that. Just soaking in every word that Jesus spoke. Meanwhile, Martha was out in the kitchen preparing a dinner. We all know this story because this story oftentimes reminds us of ourselves and our own activities. Instead of sitting at the feet of Jesus, we are found doing something else. But listen to these words again. Luke chapter 10, beginning with verse 40. Luke chapter 10, beginning with verse 40, says, Martha gets upset because Mary is not in the kitchen with her. And so she complains to Jesus, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. And Jesus, in all the patience and tenderness, compassion that he has, tells her. And let me say this, perhaps he's telling you this today too, and me. Martha, Martha, Jesus answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better. Notice, and this is important, notice Jesus did not say what is more important or is more necessary. It says Mary has chosen what is wrong or better, and it will not be taken away from her. Now I want you to think with me for a moment. Was Martha committing a sin by fixing a meal in the kitchen while Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus? No, she wasn't. Of course she wasn't. But here's the problem. She was so preoccupied with what she was doing that she didn't even realize that God was sitting in her living room. This is important. She was so busy about doing these good things that she didn't even realize that God was sitting in her living room. And so we ask ourselves this question. How many times have we been found doing good things and not realizing that God was sitting in our living room? Here is a real-life application in this story for you and I today. Whether we realize it or not, we oftentimes make the same mistake Martha did. You and I get so caught up in the here and now that we fail to deal with the eternal, the things that will last forever and ever. That was Martha's problem. Doing good things but missing out on the truly eternal things. Now, how does that work in everyday life? One man by the name of Richard Swenson, who happened to be a medical doctor, wrote a book in which he discusses one of the major problems of our time of heavy anxiety and stress, and he called it overload, and says that people are just plain overloaded. And so he listed some. He said, we're overloaded with commitments. We've committed ourselves to go here and there to take part in this activity or that social function. As a result, we soon begin meeting ourselves coming and going because we have overloaded ourselves in the area of commitments. Secondly, we're also overloaded with possessions. Our closets are full, our garages are overflowing. We've gone into debt to pay for all these things that we simply must have. And now we live in a barricaded communities because we're afraid that someone will come and steal the possessions that we've worked so hard to collect. And isn't that the truth? Thirdly, we have an overload in the area of work. We get up early, we fight traffic, and experience intolerable working conditions because we have to if we're going to pay for all the possessions that we've accumulated. And then he says, there's also an information overload. He said that as a doctor, he had to read 220 articles a month just to keep up with all the changes that are taking place in his profession. And with the internet, there's an information superhighway, as they call it. But the problem is that we can't possibly absorb it all. We could go on, couldn't we? In spite of all the busyness of our lives. Number 3, Paul tells us that we must make an honest attempt, in spite of all of these things, to understand what God's will is for our lives. We must make an honest attempt to try and understand what God's will is for our lives. Again, notice Ephesians chapter 5, verse 17. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Now, let's be serious for a moment. Do we have any idea of what God's will is for us in the coming year? Do we have an inkling? Have we given any thought to it? Do you think that He wants our minds so saturated with worries and anxieties that we can't think about spiritual things? Do we think He wants our calendar so crowded that we don't have time for the important things, like sitting at His feet? What do you think God's will is for you this year? I hope that you will forgive me for making a few suggestions in trying to understand what God's will is for you. And let me begin with this premise. You are in church this morning because you believe God should be a part of your life. That is why you're here. So moving on from there, let me make a few suggestions. That we begin by establishing priorities for the coming year. We have to decide just where God stands in our lives. So we must ask ourselves, who or what is most important in my life right now? You know what that is. Because you know yourselves better than any of the rest of us. But knowing that, my hope and my prayer is that your answer will be, my relationship with God is the most important thing to me for this coming year. And so, if that's the case, then put at the top of your list of priorities. And then think about what comes later, afterwards. And if we put God at the very top of our list of priorities and our relationship with Him, then when the Sabbath rolls around or some other activity our church is sponsoring, whether it's raining or whatever, we want to make a point to be part of that. Prayer meeting. Wouldn't that be a wonderful way to start the new year by saying, you know what? I'm going to commit myself to being at prayer meeting. Now, here's a couple of statistics that you may not be aware of. Some of you obviously probably are. But do you know that, and you can add Vespers to this list, you can add AY to this list, Adventist Youth, but you can also add prayer meeting. Those are activities that most Adventist churches are not participating in anymore. They just don't open the doors. They say, give me a reason for opening the doors, turning on all the lights and the AC just for 4 or 5 people. It doesn't make economic sense, does it, to do that? And so most churches just simply say, okay, we just won't do it. No more Vespers either. And no more Adventist youth. And it might surprise you to learn that this church, and it may be different in your church, and I'm not saying anything negative about the church where you belong or where you attend normally. But our area in the state of Florida, the Midport Church, is one of the few churches left that actually do all of those things. We have prayer meeting, we have Vespers, we have AY, all of those things. We could do better, but we offer those things. And so neither rain nor shine will interfere with our being at church. Why? Because God comes first in our lives. And we will choose to worship the Lord, and nothing will interfere with that. Secondly, another suggestion. We must also schedule a definite time each day to pray and read God's Word. If we really want to know what God's will is for our lives, then we must read His Word. Because it's in His Word that He reveals Himself to us and His plan for our lives. And so there's another priority. Pray for yourself and your family and the people around you. Pray for the church. Sometimes we may never know how much our prayers mean. But we will be blessed as we grow in faith and trust in the Lord. Thirdly, we must also spend time with our family. And I'm the first to confess, I'm not so good in that. Because this is not an excuse, but it seems like pastors have so many things going on that we oftentimes put other people first. And so, that may not be exclusive to to pastors. But it just seems to be one of those things that is prevalent in our society today. And so we must spend time with our family. No cell phones, no telephones, no TV. And can you just imagine? You hear the groans of pain. A couple of years ago, our family, we took a road trip out to Montana. And the place we stayed, no internet. The nearest place had a little country store that had one of these satellite internet things. And you had to be there. So you couldn't sit in your tent and get on the cell phone. And no cell phone either. Nothing. And I want to tell you that, and I'm being vulnerable here today, you know. I want to tell you, it was like withdrawals. You ever tried to withdraw from eating chocolate or something, you know? Candy, sweets, or whatever? It was like a withdrawal. Always thinking you need to walk around looking for a signal. But after the 4th or 5th day, it was wonderful. No more worries about who was calling or who wasn't calling and picking it up when somebody calls and, excuse me, you know, all of these kinds of things. You know how it goes. Put your conversation on hold while I catch this. Hey, listen, I go by construction sites. People are building houses. Companies are building houses in my neighborhood. And I go by there, and sometimes when I go by, I look, and the workers are out there on their cell phones. Hey, shouldn't they be using a hammer or something? Pounding in a few nails here and there. Look busy at least, you know. But no, they're there doing this. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to encourage you to take some time in this new year, each day or each week, just set it aside and have none of these things. It may be awkward at first. Like sitting across from somebody and they're staring back at you and you can't think of anything to say. But after a while, you'll be surprised. You can find something to talk about. And you'll find how rewarding it is. You know, it is still true. So goes the family, so goes the church, so goes the community, and so goes society. It is true. Someone once said, the two greatest enemies of time are regrets for things we did in the past and anxiety about what will happen to us in the future. Too many of us are either living in the past or we're living in the future. Neither one is a reality. And so I want to bring our time together to a close today by sharing with you a real-life incident that I believe goes a long way towards trying to help us understand just what society is like and how to use the time that we have. One author tells about a girl who went to college and just hated it. But she told herself, if I can ever get out of college and get married and have children, I know I will finally be able to enjoy my life. So she stuck with it. She went to classes every day and finally graduated from college. Then she got married and had children and discovered that children are a lot of work. They're a lot of work. So she told herself, if I can just get these kids raised, then I'll be able to relax and really enjoy life. But about the time the kids were entering high school, her husband said, guess what? We don't have enough money to send our kids to college. I guess you'll have to go out and get a job. Well, she didn't want to, but she knew that he was right. And they needed the money. So she went to work, and she hated it. But she told herself, if I can just get these kids out of college and get all the bills paid, then I can quit work and really enjoy life. Finally, the last child graduated from college, and all the bills were paid. So she walked into her employer's office and said, I quit. He said, oh, you don't want to quit now. If you stay with us just another 8 years, you'll have a pension for the rest of your life. And she thought, well, I don't want to work another 8 years, but there's all that money there. And I really can't turn down the opportunity. So she worked another 8 years. Finally, she and her husband retired at the same time. They sold their home, bought a little retirement cottage here in Florida. Then they sat down on the swing on their front porch, and they looked at the family picture album and dreamed about the good old days. You know, that's probably more true than not, isn't it? Someone once said, life is what happens to you while you're making plans to do something else. And I believe that. Because for the life of me, I cannot tell you where the last 40 years have gone in my life. Our oldest son will be 40 this year. I just can't imagine where the time has gone. I still remember bringing him home from the hospital. Little tiny thing like that. And now, he's 40. And you know what? He's closer to my age. You ever notice that? How your kids are getting older, but you're not? And now we have more in common than we did before, because we're both looking and we see where we're going. That's how quickly time goes. And so I'd like to challenge you as you look forward to 2015, that you think about these priorities that we have talked about. Make some real changes in your life. Begin to really enjoy life as you've never enjoyed it before with God. With Jesus there, studying His Word, praying, all these other things will take care of themselves. That is my prayer for you, for all of us, for myself, as we look forward to 2015. In Jesus' name.